The Duke spots "Save us" written on a cliffside. When he rows ashore, his hound uncovers a hidden chest. The woman's hands were bleeding as she dragged the final stone into place, her nails torn to the quick, salt spray stinging every raw wound. Behind her, in the cave's darkness, a child whimpered. Not her child, never her child, though she had nursed him through fever and sung him through nightmares for 347 days. The words she had carved into the cliff face with a rusted ship's nail glinted in the morning light. Save us! Not a prayer, a command. Because Ilara Thornwood, once celebrated as the Pearl of Sussex, now reduced to a castaway on a forgotten shore, had learned that God helped those who helped themselves. And if the Duke of Greystone's vessel didn't alter course in the next hour, the tide would swallow them both, and the secret buried in that iron chest would die with them. A secret that would topple 3 noble houses and prove that the boy sleeping on her lap was the true heir to an empire built on lies. Wait, before the next confession unfolds. If this story has already stirred your heart, tell us where you're watching from. To make sure you don't miss the next betrayal, kiss, or redemption, subscribe and join our circle. The next heartbeat might change everything. Now, back to the scene. The Duke of Greystone stood at the helm of the Sovereign's Promise, his spyglass trained on the cliffs of what his charts called Widow's Reach, a cruel name for a crueler place where ships went to die and sailors' wives went to weep. But it wasn't the treacherous rocks that held his attention. It was the words. 2 words that shouldn't exist on a shore no living soul was supposed to inhabit. Captain Barrett. His voice carried the weight of a man who had commanded armies before he'd inherited a duchy. Change course. Due east toward that cliff face. The captain, a weathered Cornishman who'd sailed these waters for 40 years, blanched. "Your Grace, those are the devil's teeth. No ship has—" "I didn't ask for a history lesson. I gave an order." Adrian Blackwell, 7th Duke of Greystone, wasn't a man who inspired argument. At 32, he carried himself with the rigid discipline of his military years, his jaw perpetually set as if carved from the same granite as his ancestral home. His eyes, pale gray like winter ice, had witnessed horrors at Waterloo that would have broken lesser men. He had returned a hero, inherited a crumbling estate, and spent 7 years rebuilding it into something formidable through sheer force of will and strategic coldness. He had no patience for sentiment, no tolerance for weakness, and absolutely no interest in romance, a fact his grandmother reminded him of with increasing desperation at every family gathering. Yet something about those words on the cliff made his pulse quicken in a way no battle charge ever had. Within 20 minutes, the Sovereign's Promise had dropped anchor in waters so shallow that every sailor aboard muttered prayers. Adrian commandeered the skiff himself, along with his wolfhound Dante, a massive gray beast who had followed him from battlefield to ballroom and seemed the only living creature whose loyalty he trusted absolutely. "Your Grace, at least take 2 men with you," Captain Barrett pleaded. "And risk 6 lives instead of 3? I think not." Adrian was already descending the rope ladder, Dante leaping into the skiff with surprising grace for an animal that weighed nearly as much as a man. The rowing was brutal. Currents fought him with every stroke, trying to dash the small boat against rocks that jutted from the water like broken teeth. Spray soaked his coat, his hair, his skin. But Adrian had rowed through worse, through rivers choked with bodies, through rain that turned battlefields to crimson mud. This was merely water. As the skiff's hull scraped sand, he saw her. She stood at the cave mouth like an apparition, her gown, once fine, now reduced to rags, clinging to a frame too thin by half. Her dark hair whipped around a face that might have been beautiful if not for the hollow shadows beneath her eyes, the fever-bright desperation in her gaze. She held something wrapped in what looked like a coat several sizes too large. "You came," she said, and her voice cracked on the words. "Dear God, you actually came!" Adrian secured the skiff and stepped onto the sand, Dante immediately bounding forward to investigate. "Madam, are you alone here?" "Not alone." She shifted the bundle in her arms, and Adrian realized with a jolt that it was a child, a boy of perhaps 3 or 4, unconscious or sleeping, his small face pale against her shoulder. "But we will be dead by nightfall if we remain. The spring tide reaches the cave mouth. We've been surviving on rainwater and whatever the sea deposits, but he's growing weaker. Please, I'm begging you." Adrian had learned long ago to read people. It was what kept him alive when diplomacy failed and battles began. This woman wasn't lying. Every line of her body screamed exhaustion, desperation, determination. But there was something else, too. Breeding, education. The way she held herself despite the rags, the precise articulation despite her obvious distress. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Does it matter?" "It does if I'm to risk my ship bringing you aboard." She met his eyes then, and Adrian felt something shift in his chest. A crack in the ice had carefully cultivated. "My name is Ilara Thornwood, and if that name means anything to you, then you know I'm already dead. I died 15 months ago in a fire that consumed my family's London townhouse. So I'm either a ghost, Your Grace, or I'm someone who desperately needs your discretion as much as your rescue." Adrian did know that name. The Thornwood fire had been the scandal of the season, a tragic blaze that killed the Earl of Thornwood, his wife, and their only daughter during a ball celebrating her engagement to Lord Pemberton's son. The investigation had concluded it was caused by a knocked candle, accelerated by strong winds. The house had burned to its foundations. No bodies were recovered intact enough to identify with certainty. "That's impossible," he said flatly. "Impossible things happen every day, Your Grace. I'm living proof." She took a step forward, and Adrian saw her legs tremble. "I will explain everything. I will answer every question. I will submit to any investigation you deem necessary. But please, for the love of mercy, take the boy first. If you can only save one of us, save him." Dante had been circling the cave entrance, sniffing with the focused intensity he usually reserved for hunting. Now he began to dig, his massive paws sending sand flying. Adrian had learned to trust the hound's instincts. They had saved his life twice in France when Dante had detected ambushes before they sprung. "Dante, heel!" he commanded, but the wolfhound ignored him, digging deeper with almost frantic energy. "He found it," Ilara whispered. "I buried it 2 feet down, wrapped in oilcloth. I prayed if something happened to us, someone would eventually discover it." "Found what?" "The reason I'm dead. The reason we're both dead." She sank onto a rock, still cradling the child. "The proof that will destroy the Pemberton family and everyone who conspired to murder us." Adrian felt the familiar rush of standing on a precipice, that moment before a cavalry charge when every sense sharpened and the world reduced to a single choice: advance or retreat, trust or doubt, life or death. Dante unearthed something, an iron chest, small enough to carry, but clearly heavy from the way it thudded onto the sand. The lock had rusted, but the chest itself appeared intact. Adrian made his decision. He strode to Ilara, took the child from her arms. She resisted for only a heartbeat before her strength gave out, and passed the boy to his own shoulder with the ease of someone who'd carried wounded soldiers from battlefields. The child barely stirred. "Can you walk?" he asked Ilara. "I've walked every day for 15 months. I can walk a few more yards." "Then bring the chest. And pray my crew doesn't mutiny when they see what I'm bringing aboard." The climb into the Sovereign's promise nearly killed her. Adrian saw Elara's hands slip twice on the rope ladder, saw her jaw clench with such force he thought her teeth might shatter. But she made it, collapsing onto the deck with the iron chest clutched to her chest like a shield. Captain Barrett took one look at her and crossed himself. Holy Mother of God! "Prepare the guest cabin," Adrian ordered, already moving toward the stairs. "Hot water, clean linens, and whatever food won't shock a starving stomach. Then bring Dr. Ashford from his quarters. Tell him he has 2 patients." "Your Grace, is that?" "Captain, I will explain everything once I've ensured these people don't die on my watch. Until then, I expect discretion from every man aboard. Anyone who speaks of this before we reach Greystone Lands will find themselves seeking employment elsewhere. Are we understood?" The threat worked. Within minutes, Adrian had Elara and the boy installed in what was nominally a guest cabin, but functioned more as his own emergency quarters. It was simple but clean. A narrow berth, a washstand, a small desk bolted to the floor. Dr. Ashford, a thin man with gentle hands and sharp eyes, examined the child first. Adrian watched from the doorway as Elara refused to leave the boy's side, her hand constantly stroking his fevered forehead. Dehydration, malnutrition, and the early stages of consumption, Dr. Ashford pronounced grimly. But he's young, and clearly has been cared for with devotion. "With proper treatment, I believe he'll recover. The lady, however—" "The lady is sitting right here," Elara interrupted. "And the lady can wait until you've done everything possible for Thomas." Thomas. So the child had a name. Adrian filed that information away. Dr. Ashford worked with quiet efficiency, administering drops of some tincture, carefully spooning water mixed with honey between the boy's cracked lips. Elara accepted similar treatment with visible reluctance, her eyes never leaving Thomas. "I'll need to examine you properly," Dr. Ashford told her. "Those hands require immediate attention, and I suspect you're concealing other injuries." "Later." "Madam." "I said later. Thomas first. Always Thomas first." The fierceness in her voice made Adrian remember battlefield mothers, the women who followed armies and fought like demons to protect their children. But she'd said the boy wasn't hers. So what was he to her? Dr. Ashford caught Adrian's eye and gave a minute shake of his head. She wouldn't be persuaded. "Very well. I'll prepare a tonic and return in an hour. Your Grace, might I speak with you privately?" They stepped into the narrow corridor. Dr. Ashford kept his voice low. "The child will survive if we're careful. The woman, she's held herself together through sheer will. But when that will finally breaks, the collapse will be catastrophic. I've seen it before in soldiers who survive impossible circumstances. The moment they're safe, the body gives up." "Then we ensure she has reason to keep fighting," Adrian said grimly. "How long until we reach Greystone Lands?" "At current speed, 36 hours. Make it 24. I'll speak to Captain Barrett." When Adrian returned to the cabin, Elara had positioned herself on the floor beside the berth where Thomas slept, her hand clutching the child's through the blankets. The iron chest sat at her feet, unopened. "You'll want to know what's inside," she said without looking at him. "I'll want to know many things, but first you'll eat." He'd brought a tray himself, weak broth, soft bread, stewed apples, food that wouldn't revolt a stomach accustomed to privation. She stared at it as if it offered poison. "I can't." "You can, and you will, because if you die, who protects Thomas?" It was the right lever. Elara took the bowl with shaking hands and forced herself to eat, each spoonful clearly an act of will. Adrian sat in the cabin's only chair and waited, patient as stone. When she'd managed half the bowl, she spoke. "You deserve answers. I deserve nothing, but I'll have them nonetheless." A ghost of a smile crossed her haggard face. "They said you were cold, even cruel. The Iron Duke, they called you. I've been called worse. I'm sure." She set the bowl aside. "The night of the fire, I discovered something in my father's study. Documents hidden in a false drawer. Letters between my father and Lord Pemberton, arranging my marriage, not for love or even alliance, but to silence my father about certain investments they'd made together. Investments in ships. Ships that brought cargo from the Indies. Cargo." Adrian's voice went flat. He knew where this was leading. Human cargo. Slaves. Despite the abolition, despite the laws, they were running a trade network disguised as legitimate shipping. My father kept records as insurance against betrayal. When I confronted him, he laughed. He said I'd marry Pemberton's son and be grateful for the privilege, and if I spoke a word of what I'd learned, he'd see me committed to an asylum where no one would believe a hysterical woman's ravings. The bitterness in her voice could have corroded steel. So I took the records. I was going to go to the authorities, to Parliament, to anyone who would listen. But Pemberton discovered what I'd done. He came to our house that night with men. I heard them arguing with my father, heard furniture breaking, heard my mother screaming. I grabbed Thomas, my cousin's son, left in our care while his parents traveled abroad, and I ran. I took the servants' stairs, the back passages. I heard the fire start. I smelled the smoke, and I kept running. "Why didn't you come forward afterward?" Adrian demanded. "Why hide?" "Because Pemberton controlled the investigation, because my father's associates had power in every court in England, because a woman with no family, no resources, and no proof beyond documents that could be called forgeries would be silenced permanently." She met his eyes. "I know how the world works, Your Grace. I know that justice requires more than truth. It requires power. I had none, so I ran, and I kept running, until a storm drove the ship I'd booked passage on against those rocks. The captain and crew died. Only Thomas and I made the cave. For 15 months. For 15 months, living on what the sea provided, praying for rescue, and protecting the only evidence that could prove what I knew." She touched the iron chest. "Letters in my father's hand, ledgers in Pemberton's, documentation of routes, payments, bribes, names of officials who looked the other way. Everything." Adrian stood, began to pace in the small space. Every instinct he'd honed through war and politics was screaming at him. This woman was either speaking truth or spinning the most elaborate lie he'd ever encountered. "Open it," he said. Elara produced a key from a chain around her neck. He hadn't noticed it before, hidden beneath her tattered gown. Her hands shook as she fitted it to the lock. The mechanism resisted, rusted by salt and time, but finally yielded. Inside lay oilcloth packets, meticulously wrapped. Elara removed them with reverent care, unwrapping each to reveal papers preserved with obsessive precision. Adrian read by the light of the cabin's lamp. He read letters signed by men he knew, men who sat in Parliament and dined at Carlton House. He read ledgers detailing transactions that turned his stomach. He read testimony from sailors paid to keep silent, from clerks bribed to falsify documents. He read proof of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of British society. "This is enough to hang 20 men," he said quietly. "I know. It's also enough to get you killed. If Pemberton even suspects you're alive, he'll finish what he started. I know that too." Elara's voice was steady now, strengthened by finally sharing her burden. "That's why I need your help, Your Grace. Not just rescue, protection. And most importantly, someone with the power to ensure this evidence reaches people who can't be bought or intimidated. Adrian looked at her, this woman who had survived impossible circumstances, who had protected a child not her own, who had carved a message into stone with bleeding hands and waited 15 months. He thought of his grandmother's endless parade of suitable ladies, each perfectly accomplished and utterly forgettable. He thought of the cold, calculated marriage he'd always assumed he'd eventually make, one of alliance and dynasty, untainted by messy emotion. He thought of the promises he'd made to himself after Waterloo, to never again be responsible for lives beyond his ability to protect. Then he looked at Thomas, sleeping peacefully for the first time in God knew how long, and at Ilara, who watched the boy with such fierce devotion that it made something in Adrian's chest ache. "Very well," he said. "You'll have my protection, both of you. I'll bring this evidence to the Duke of Wellington himself if necessary. But understand this, Miss Thornwood, once we begin this path, there's no retreat. We'll be declaring war on some of the most powerful families in England. I've been at war for 15 months, Your Grace. I'm not afraid. You should be, because they'll come for you with everything they have. Then it's fortunate I'll have the Iron Duke standing with me." For the first time since he couldn't remember when, Adrian felt his carefully constructed walls tremble. Not crack, not yet, but tremble. "Get some rest," he said gruffly. "We dock at Greystone in 24 hours. After that, everything changes." "Everything already has," Ilara whispered, but Adrian was already gone, striding onto the deck where wind and spray could cool the unfamiliar heat he felt burning through his veins. Part 2. Greystone Abbey rose from the coastal cliffs like a fortress carved by giants, all gray stone and sharp angles, utterly devoid of the romantic ivy-covered charm that characterized most English estates. It suited its master perfectly, imposing, austere, and built to withstand sieges both literal and metaphorical. Adrian stood at his study window, watching as a coach bore Ilara and Thomas toward the east wing, where he'd ordered rooms prepared. Dr. Ashford had insisted both patients needed at least a week of bed rest and careful feeding before they could be considered out of danger. Adrian had agreed immediately, then spent the next 12 hours planning how to keep their presence secret from everyone except his most trusted staff. It had been 3 days since the rescue. 3 days of watching Ilara slowly unfurl like a flower too long denied sunlight, eating more at each meal, regaining color in her cheeks, allowing Dr. Ashford to tend her injuries properly. 3 days of watching Thomas come back to life with the resilience only children possessed, his laughter echoing through corridors that hadn't heard such sounds in decades. 3 days of Adrian lying awake at night, remembering the fierce protectiveness in Ilara's eyes, the grace with which she'd endured the unendurable. "Your Grace, the investigators from London have arrived." Adrian turned to find his butler, Morrison, standing in the doorway. Morrison had served the Blackwell family for 40 years and possessed the rare quality of absolute discretion. He was one of only 5 people at Greystone who knew the full truth of their guests. "Show them to the library. I'll join them shortly." Adrian had spent the past 3 days not only ensuring his guests' recovery, but also carefully deploying the evidence Ilara had preserved. Copies of the most damning documents had gone to 3 separate investigators he trusted, men who owed him favors from the war, men whose integrity couldn't be purchased. Their initial findings had arrived this morning, and they confirmed Ilara's account in every particular. The conspiracy was real. Pemberton was guilty, and at least 15 members of Parliament were complicit. "Morrison, how is Miss Thornwood this afternoon?" "Resting, Your Grace, though she sent word that she wishes to speak with you when convenient." Tell her I'll call upon her this evening, after I've dealt with our visitors. The investigators, Bartholomew Cross and James Whitmore, both former military men turned private inquiry agents, stood as Adrian entered the library. Cross was stocky and methodical, Whitmore lean and sharp-eyed. Adrian had used them before when dealing with matters that required both discretion and ruthlessness. "Your Grace," Cross began without preamble, "the situation is worse than we initially believed. Pemberton's network extends not just through shipping, but also banking, insurance, and several government contracts. If we move against him directly, we risk a financial panic that could destabilize half of London's commercial sector. I don't care about financial panic. I care about justice. With respect, Your Grace, the courts care about evidence and procedure. What you've given us is explosive, but obtaining it through legal channels will take months, perhaps years. And the moment Pemberton learns we're investigating, he'll destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses." "Including Miss Thornwood?" Whitmore added quietly. "The woman's survival is a miracle, but it also makes her the single most dangerous person to Pemberton's interests. He'll have her killed within days of learning she's alive." Adrian's hands clenched. "Then we move faster than he can react." "How?" Cross spread documents across the library table. "Even if we arrest Pemberton tomorrow, his associates will claim the evidence is fabricated. They'll argue that a woman with obvious grudges against her father and fiancé created false documents to exact revenge. Without corroborating witnesses, without documentation we can prove came from official sources, this case collapses. We have witnesses. The sailors mentioned in these ledgers. Most are dead or disappeared. We found 3 who survived, but all have been paid substantial sums to forget what they saw. Fear and money make for unreliable testimony." Adrian began to pace, his military training taking over. This was no different from planning a campaign. Identify the objective, assess resources, anticipate enemy movements, strike decisively. What if we force Pemberton's hand, make him act rashly, make mistakes? "Dangerous," Whitmore said. "Using Miss Thornwood as bait. I wasn't suggesting that." Adrian's voice could have frozen blood. "But Pemberton thinks she's dead. That gives us an advantage. What if we let him continue thinking so while we build our case from the inside? Plant agents in his household, intercept his correspondence, document his current activities. If he's still running ships, we catch him in the act." Cross and Whitmore exchanged glances. "It could work," Cross admitted, "but it requires time, months of careful surveillance. Then we have months. Meanwhile, Miss Thornwood and the child remain here under my protection." "Your Grace," Whitmore said carefully, "having an unmarried woman of quality living in your household, even with the most innocent intentions, will cause talk. Especially a woman who's supposed to be dead. Let them talk." And when Pemberton's agents inevitably investigate those rumors, because they will, the man hasn't survived this long by being careless. Adrian stopped pacing. The problem was real. Greystone Abbey was remote, but not invisible. Servants gossiped, visitors called. His grandmother alone would demand explanations within days of learning he'd installed a mysterious woman in the East Wing. Then we give them a story they'll believe, something that explains her presence without revealing her identity. Such as, she's a widow, a distant cousin who recently lost her husband and child in a tragic accident abroad. She's come to Greystone to recover from her grief, along with her young nephew who survived the incident. I'm offering her sanctuary out of family obligation." Cross nodded slowly. It could work. Widows in mourning are expected to withdraw from society. It would explain her seclusion, her desire for privacy. "And the resemblance to Alara Thornwood, if anyone notices," Whitmore pressed. 15 months of hardship can change a person dramatically. Besides, who would believe a dead woman could resurrect herself? The mind rejects such impossibilities, even when confronted with evidence. You'll need to coach her carefully. A single mistake, a single inconsistency in the story, and Pemberton will know. I'm aware of the risks. Are you? Whitmore's expression was grave, because the greatest risk isn't to your reputation or even to the investigation. It's to your heart, Your Grace. That woman has been through hell. She's vulnerable, grateful, and dependent on your protection. It would be remarkably easy to confuse gratitude with affection, protection with enough. Adrian's voice cracked like a whip. My personal feelings are irrelevant. Miss Thornwood requires protection. I'm providing it. That is the extent of our arrangement. Of course, Your Grace. But Whitmore's knowing look said he didn't believe a word of it. After the investigators left, Adrian sat alone in the library, staring at the documents spread before him. Evidence of human cruelty preserved in neat handwriting. Lives reduced to ledger entries. Profits calculated in human suffering. This was why he'd built his walls, why he'd cultivated coldness, because caring meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Ilara standing in that cave mouth, choosing to save a child before herself. He saw her hands bleeding from carving a message into stone. He saw her fierce determination to survive, not for herself, but for justice. And he knew, with the certainty that had guided him through a dozen battlefields, that he was already lost. Ilara stood at the window of her room. Her room, she could scarcely believe it, watching the sun set over the sea. Real beds, real food, real safety. Luxuries she'd dreamed of during those endless nights in the cave, never quite believing she'd experience them again. Thomas was asleep in the adjacent nursery, properly bathed and dressed in clothes that actually fit, his stomach full of warm milk and honey cakes. Mrs. Patterson, the kindly housekeeper, had produced a wooden horse for him, and the boy had clutched it like treasure. A soft knock interrupted her reverie. "Miss Thornwood, His Grace requests the honor of your company." Ilara smoothed her borrowed dress, simple gray wool, appropriate for the widow she was supposed to be, and followed the maid downstairs to a small parlor she hadn't seen before. It was less formal than the grand rooms she'd glimpsed, filled with books and maps rather than priceless artwork. Adrian stood as she entered, and Ilara felt that peculiar jolt she'd experienced every time she'd seen him over the past 3 days. He was handsome in a severe way, all sharp angles and controlled power. But it was his eyes that arrested her, winter gray, yet somehow capable of unexpected warmth when he looked at Thomas or listened to Dr. Ashford's reports. "Miss Thornwood, please sit." He gestured to a chair by the fire. "I trust your accommodations are satisfactory." "They're miraculous, Your Grace. I can never repay your kindness." "I don't want repayment." He took the chair opposite, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes. Marks of laughter or sorrow, she couldn't tell which. "I want to discuss our strategy going forward." For the next hour, Adrian outlined everything. The investigators' findings, the legal challenges, the timeline for building a case. Ilara listened with growing dismay as she realized the enormity of what lay ahead. "Months?" she repeated. "We must wait months while Pemberton continues his atrocities. We must wait until our case is unassailable. Otherwise, he walks free and you die. Those are the options." The bluntness should have shocked her. Instead, it was oddly reassuring. Adrian didn't coddle or patronize. He treated her as an equal, capable of handling hard truths. "Very well. Then what do we do in the meantime?" "We establish your new identity. As far as the world is concerned, you are Mrs. Eleanor Ashford, my late mother's cousin's daughter. Your husband, a merchant, died along with your infant daughter in a fire in Portsmouth. You've come to Greystone to recover from your grief. Thomas is your nephew, the son of your late husband's brother, now in your care. Ilara absorbed this. Eleanor Ashford. It's close enough to my real name that I'll remember to respond, but different enough to provide cover. Precisely. You'll remain in mourning, which explains your seclusion. You'll avoid social gatherings, avoid being seen by anyone who might have known Ilara Thornwood. It requires living in a sort of prison, I'm afraid. I've lived in an actual cave for 15 months, Your Grace. Your prison includes hot water and fresh bread. He'll manage. A ghost of a smile crossed his features. You're remarkably resilient. I'm remarkably stubborn. There's a difference. In my experience, the best soldiers are both. They fell into companionable silence, watching the fire. Ilara found herself studying Adrian's profile. The strong jaw, the precise way he held himself, even while seated, the hands that looked equally capable of wielding a sword or holding a child with gentleness. May I ask you something personal, Your Grace? You may ask. I may not answer. Fair enough. Why did you come? When you saw my message on the cliff, why did you risk your ship and your crew to investigate? Most men would have assumed it was a prank or ignored it entirely. Adrian was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I spent 7 years at war. I saw things that would give you nightmares. And I learned that sometimes the difference between tragedy and miracle is whether someone chose to act or looked away. I've looked away before. I've made choices that haunt me. When I saw those words, I couldn't look away again. The raw honesty in his voice made Ilara's throat tighten. What haunts you? Another personal question. You don't have to answer. But he did. Waterloo. The final charge. I ordered my cavalry forward, even though I knew some wouldn't with Marin. 63 men rode out. 41 came back. I still see their faces some nights. Still wonder if there was another way, a better strategy, a choice that would have saved them. You won the battle. I survived the battle. There's a difference. He turned to look at her fully, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. You asked why I came. Perhaps I was hoping that saving 2 lives might balance the scales somehow. Foolish, I know. The dead don't care about mathematical equations. It's not foolish. It's human. I've been called many things, Miss Thornwood. Human is rarely among them. Then people haven't been paying attention. Something shifted between them then, a recognition, an understanding. They were both survivors of impossible circumstances, both carrying burdens that couldn't be set down, both pretending to be stronger than they felt. Adrian stood abruptly, breaking the moment. It's late. You should rest. Tomorrow we'll begin your transformation into Mrs. Eleanor Ashford. We'll need to rehearse your story until it's second nature. Ilara rose as well. Thank you, Your Grace, for everything. Adrian. I beg your pardon? If we're to convince anyone you're my cousin, you should probably use my given name, at least in private. Then you must call me Eleanor, or Ellie, as my mother did. Eleanor suits you better. Ellie sounds too soft. You're many things, but soft isn't one of them. Ilara felt an unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest. When was the last time someone had truly seen her? Not the Pearl of Sussex, not the obedient daughter, not even the desperate survivor. Just her. Good night, Adrian. Good night. She made it halfway to the door before his voice stopped her. Eleanor. Those 63 men, they knew the risks. They rode anyway because they believed in something worth fighting for. You've given me something worth fighting for again. Thank you for that. Ilara didn't trust herself to speak. She simply nodded and fled before the tears she'd been holding back for 15 months finally broke free. Part 3. 6 weeks passed in a strange sort of domesticity that Ilara had never experienced even in her old life. She woke each morning in a real bed, breakfasted with Thomas in the sunny nursery, spent afternoons learning to be Eleanor Ashford under Adrian's patient tutelage. "Remember," he would say, "your husband was William Ashford, a merchant dealing primarily in textiles. You met him at a county assembly in Hampshire. The courtship was brief but genuine." How brief? 3 months. Long enough to be respectable, short enough to explain why his family in the north never met you before the wedding. "And our daughter, what was her name?" Adrian hesitated. This was the part of the fiction he clearly disliked most, building tragedy upon tragedy. Catherine, she was 6 months old. Ilara committed every detail to memory. She practiced her signature as Eleanor Ashford until it flowed naturally. She learned the geography of Portsmouth, where the fictional fire had occurred. She studied the mannerisms of widowhood, the proper depths of mourning, the acceptable reasons for seclusion. But mostly, she spent time with Adrian. It started innocently enough. He would join her and Thomas for afternoon tea, delighting the boy with stories of his wolfhound's escapades. Then he began appearing in the library when she was reading, engaging her in discussions of poetry and politics with an intellectual fervor she'd never been allowed to express in society. "Most men find educated women threatening," she observed one afternoon. "Most men are idiots." Adrian turned a page in his book, Military Strategy, naturally. "I spent 7 years taking orders from Wellington, who valued intelligence over ego. It rather ruined me for the delicate sensibilities of drawing-room conversation." "Is that why you never married? They say you're the most eligible bachelor in England, yet you've avoided every matchmaking mama from here to London." "They say a great many things, most of which are nonsense." But his jaw tightened. "I never married because I saw no point in shackling myself to someone who wanted my title and fortune rather than anything real." Surely some woman must have wanted the man beneath the title. If so, she hid it remarkably well. He set his book aside. "What about you? Your engagement to Pemberton's son, was there any affection there, or was it purely arrangement?" Ilara shuddered. "Charles Pemberton was everything I despised. Arrogant, cruel to servants, careless with money he hadn't earned. But my father assured me I'd learn to tolerate him, that love was a fiction invented by poets, that duty was all that mattered." "Did you believe him?" "I was raised to believe him. A woman's opinion on her own marriage was considered charmingly irrelevant. And now, do you still think love is a fiction?" Ilara, at his gaze, saw something unguarded there that made her pulse race. "Now I think perhaps I was never given the chance to find out." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Then Thomas burst into the library, Dante bounding at his heels, and the spell broke. "Aunt Ellie, His Grace says I can learn to ride, truly ride, not just sit on a pony." Adrian rose, his expression shifting back to its usual controlled calm. "If you approve, of course. The exercise would strengthen him. I trust your judgment." The words came out more intimate than Ilara intended, and she saw Adrian's eyes darken in response. Over dinner that night, they'd begun taking meals together, abandoning the formal separation of guest and host. Adrian shared news from his investigators. "They've confirmed Pemberton is still running ships. 4 departures in the last month alone, all officially carrying textiles and spices. But the tonnage doesn't match the cargo manifests. Can we prove what they're really carrying? We're working on it. Cross has planted an informant in Pemberton's shipping office, but it's delicate work. One mistake and we lose everything." "How much longer?" 2 months, perhaps 3. I know it's not what you want to hear. What I want is irrelevant. What matters is building a case strong enough to destroy them completely." Adrian studied her across the candlelit table. "You've become quite ruthless, Eleanor. I learned from the best." She raised her wineglass in mock salute. "The Iron Duke himself." "Don't believe everything you hear about me." "I don't. I believe what I see, and what I see is a man who pretends to be cold because caring hurt him too badly." Adrian set down his fork with careful precision. "You see too much. Perhaps. Or perhaps you're simply out of practice at hiding from someone who understands. And you understand me? I understand what it's like to survive something that should have killed you, then have to pretend you're fine when you're still bleeding inside." Ilara's voice softened. "I see the way you check on Thomas at night, even though Mrs. Patterson assures you he's well. I see how you avoid the East Wing's portrait gallery, where I assume your parents' paintings hang. I see a man who carries his dead like I carry mine." Adrian stood abruptly. "I should retire. Early meetings tomorrow." "Adrian, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "No, you're right. You see too clearly. It's unsettling." He left before she could respond, and Ilara sat alone at the table wondering if she'd pushed too far. But later that night, she found a note slipped under her door. "My parents died when I was 12. Carriage accident. I was supposed to be with them but stayed home with a cold. I've spent 20 years wondering if my presence would have changed anything, if the extra weight would have slowed the horses, if we'd have taken a different route, if the wheel would have broken at a different moment on a different stretch of road. Logic says it's foolish. My heart doesn't care about logic. You're right. I do carry my dead, but perhaps carrying them together is easier than carrying them alone. A." Ilara pressed the note to her chest and allowed herself to imagine something she'd thought impossible, a future where she wasn't alone, where survival wasn't the only victory, where two people who'd learned to armor themselves against pain might dare to be vulnerable again. It was terrifying, it was intoxicating, it was doomed. The axe fell on a Tuesday. Ilara was in the garden with Thomas, watching him chase butterflies with Dante when Morrison appeared with a sealed letter. The sight of the butler's face, professionally neutral but with a tightness around his eyes, sent ice through her veins. "For His Grace," marked urgent. Adrian read it in his study, his expression hardening with each line. When he looked up, Ilara knew the news was catastrophic. "One of Pemberton's associates recognized you." "That's impossible. I haven't left the grounds. I've been so careful." "Not you, Thomas." Adrian's voice was grim. "A portrait painter who visited Greystone last month to do some work. Apparently, he'd been commissioned by Thomas's parents before their death. He saw the boy in the gardens, thought it was a remarkable resemblance, mentioned it at a dinner party in London. The story reached Pemberton." Ilara's legs gave out. She sank into a chair, mind racing. What does it say? "Pemberton is sending men to investigate. They'll arrive at Greystone within 3 days. He's claiming Thomas was kidnapped by criminals who perished in the same Portsmouth fire that supposedly killed you. He wants to rescue his dear friend's orphaned son and bring him back to London, where he'll disappear, or have an accident, or simply die of a convenient illness." "Precisely. We can't let them take him, Adrian. I'll run again. Tonight. We'll disappear before they arrive." "And go where? With what resources? Pemberton now knows you survived. He'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. Then what do we do?" Adrian moved to the window, staring out at nothing. Ilara could see the military strategist working, calculating odds, assessing options. "We accelerate our timeline. Force the confrontation now while we still control the battlefield." "But Cross said the evidence isn't complete. We need more proof, more witnesses." "We have enough to create reasonable doubt. And we have something Pemberton doesn't." "What? You? Alive?" Testimony from a peer's daughter carries weight, especially if corroborated by documentation. It's not perfect, but it might be enough. Or it might get us both killed. "Yes." Adrian turned to face her. "That's why I'm giving you a choice, Eleanor. We can try to run, delay the inevitable. Hope Pemberton makes a mistake before he finds you. Or we can fight, stand our ground, present our evidence to the crown directly, and pray justice prevails. That's not much of a prayer. It's the only one we have. Elara thought of Thomas's laughter, of his nightmares finally fading, of the light returning to his eyes. Thought of the sailors still suffering, the lives still being destroyed by Pemberton's greed. Thought of Adrian, who'd already sacrificed so much to protect them. We fight. It will be dangerous. Pemberton won't go quietly. I didn't survive 15 months in a cave to surrender now. Adrian crossed to her, took her hands in his. The touch sent electricity through her, awareness of how close they were, how alone, how much she wanted. I won't let anything happen to you, he said fiercely. Or to Thomas. I swear it. You can't promise that. I can try. Adrian. His name came out as a whisper. If we lose, if Pemberton wins and I'm executed for some fabricated crime, I need you to know that these weeks here have been the happiest of my life. Not because of safety or comfort, but because, for the first time, someone saw me as I truly am and didn't look away. Eleanor, let me finish. I know you've built walls to protect yourself. I know you think feeling anything makes you weak, but you're wrong. The fact that you still care despite everything you've endured, that's not weakness. That's the strongest thing about you. You don't understand what you're asking. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just telling you that whatever happens, you made me believe in something beyond survival. You made me want to live, not just exist, and I'm grateful. Adrian's control finally shattered. He pulled her to him, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted his warrior's calluses. Damn it, Eleanor, I was supposed to protect you, not what? Not fall in love with you. The confession hung between them, impossible and inevitable. Elara's breath caught. I'm not sorry, Adrian continued, voice rough. I should be. I'm supposed to be rational, strategic, immune to this kind of madness. But watching you survive, watching you protect Thomas, watching you refuse to be broken by everything that should have destroyed you, how could I not? Adrian, we can't. I know. You're supposed to be my cousin, a widow in mourning. I'm supposed to be your protector, nothing more. But I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of building walls that keep out the only person who's made me feel alive in years. Even if we survive Pemberton, there's no future for us. My reputation is already destroyed. Marrying me would drag your family name through scandal. I don't care about scandal. I care about you. You say that now, but when society turns its back, when your grandmother disowns you, when Parliament questions your judgment, he silenced her with a kiss. It was nothing like the chaste pecks Elara had endured from Charles Pemberton during their engagement. This was fierce and tender, desperate and controlled, a claiming and a surrender all at once. Adrian kissed her like she was the last drink of water in a desert, like she was a battle won against impossible odds. Elara kissed him back with 15 months of loneliness, years of being invisible, a lifetime of pretending not to want exactly this. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. We'll survive this, he said. We'll destroy Pemberton. We'll clear your name. And then, if you'll have me, scandal be damned, I'm going to marry you. That's quite a lot of if. I've won battles on worse odds. This isn't a battle, Adrian. It's our lives. Then let's make them worth living. Before Elara could respond, Morrison's urgent knock shattered the moment. Your Grace, a rider from London. Pemberton's men. They're not coming in 3 days. They're already here. Part 4. Adrian had fought enough battles to know the moment when strategy gave way to chaos. This was that moment. How many? He demanded, already moving toward the weapons cabinet. 6 men. They arrived at the front gate claiming to be constables with a warrant for Thomas's custody. I told them you were out riding and they'd need to wait. But they won't wait long. Adrian loaded a pistol with practiced efficiency, then another. Morrison, lock down the house. No one enters or exits without my express permission. Send word to Cross and Whitmore in London. Use the fastest rider we have. Tell them to get the evidence to Wellington immediately. Protocol be damned. Your Grace, if you fire on King's constables? Those aren't King's constables. They're Pemberton's hired thugs in official dress. Real constables would have sent advance notice, would have come during reasonable hours, would have at least pretended to respect the courtesy due a peer. He turned to Ilara. Take Thomas to the priesthold in the East Wing. Mrs. Patterson knows where it is. I'm not hiding while You're protecting Thomas. That's what matters. Adrian's voice gentled. Please, Eleanor. I can fight them if I know you're both safe. But if you're in danger, I'll make mistakes. And mistakes get people killed. The logic was sound, but it felt like cowardice. Still, Ilara nodded. Don't die. That's my line. She wanted to kiss him again, to hold him, to make him promise the impossible. Instead, she ran. The priesthold was exactly what it sounded like. A hidden chamber built during the religious persecutions of the 16th century, when being Catholic could mean death. Mrs. Patterson had shown it to Ilara weeks ago during a tour of the house, never imagining it would be needed. Thomas didn't understand why they were hiding. Is it a game, Aunt Ellie? Yes, darling, a very important game where we must be absolutely silent. The priest-hole was accessed through a panel in the back of a wardrobe. Inside was a space perhaps 6 feet by 4, enough for 2 people to crouch in darkness. Ilar pulled the panel shut just as she heard shouting from below. Adrian met Pemberton's men in the entrance hall, flanked by 4 of his most trusted footmen, all former soldiers, all loyal, all armed. The lead thug was a scarred brute named Devlin, who'd clearly been in more tavern brawls than legal proceedings. Your Grace, Devlin's mock courtesy was insulting. We've come for the boy, Thomas Ashford. We have reason to believe he's being held here under false pretenses. You have reason to believe incorrectly. Thomas Ashford is under my protection as the nephew of my cousin, Mrs. Eleanor Ashford. He's here by his guardian's choice, not by kidnapping. Funny thing about that. We've been asking around Portsmouth where this Mrs. Ashford supposedly lost her family. No record of any William Ashford dying in a fire. No record of a baby named Catherine. No records at all. Because the investigation was incomplete. The fire destroyed municipal records along with, or because they never existed. Devlin smiled, showing yellow teeth. Lord Pemberton believes the boy is Thomas Thornwood, son of his late friend James Thornwood, heir to a considerable fortune currently being administered by his father's associates. Convenient having the boy disappear just when questions about those finances were being raised. The accusation was clever. Turn Ilara's truth into a conspiracy theory, make her the criminal. Adrian had to admire the strategy, even as he hated it. If Lord Pemberton has evidence of wrongdoing, he can present it through proper legal channels. Breaking into a peer's home with armed men isn't among them. We have a warrant. You have a piece of paper with a forged signature. I served with the magistrate you're claiming authorized this. He's currently in Scotland and has been for 3 weeks. So I'll give you one chance to leave peacefully before I have you arrested for impersonating officers of the law. Devlin's hand moved toward his coat. Adrian had his pistol out and cocked before the man's fingers touched metal. I wouldn't. Adrian's voice was Arctic calm. I've killed better men than you for worse reasons, and unlike murder, defending my home against intruders is perfectly legal. The standoff held for 3 heartbeats. 6 men against 5, but Adrian's men had military training and the high ground. More importantly, they had conviction. Devlin's thugs were mercenaries who'd flee the moment things turned genuinely dangerous. "This isn't over," Devlin growled. "Lord Pemberton has friends in very high places. So do I. In fact, I'm having tea with the Duke of Wellington next week. I'll be sure to mention this incident." The mention of Wellington did it. Even Pemberton's thugs knew better than to cross the man who defeated Napoleon. They withdrew, but the threat in Devlin's eyes promised this was merely the opening skirmish. Adrian waited until they'd cleared the grounds before lowering his pistol. His hands were steady. Training suppressed the shakes until after danger passed. But his mind was racing. They were out of time. Pemberton knew Thomas was here, which meant he knew or suspected Eleanor was alive. The next attack would be more sophisticated, more legal, and infinitely more dangerous. "Morrison, send riders to London immediately. I need Cross, Whitmore, and our solicitor at Greystone within 24 hours. And send word to my grandmother. Tell her I need her to come from Bath, immediately." "Your grandmother, Your Grace? She's a dragon, but she's our dragon. And she has connections even Pemberton can't match." In the priest hole, Ilara held Thomas close and prayed. She heard muffled shouting, the slam of doors departing, then silence. She waited. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, a soft knock on the wardrobe. "Eleanor, they're gone." She emerged to find Adrian looking grim but unharmed. Relief made her dizzy. "Did they take him? Thomas, I mean?" "No, but they'll be back. Probably with a real warrant next time, or soldiers, or both." Adrian ran a hand through his hair, a rare sign of agitation. "I've sent for reinforcements, but in the meantime, we need to prepare for the worst." "Which is?" "That Pemberton moves faster than we can counter, that the law sides with him over us, that everything we've built collapses." Thomas had fallen asleep against Ilara's shoulder, exhausted by the day's terror. She stroked his hair, feeling the weight of responsibility like chains. "There's another option," she said quietly. "What?" "I confess, publicly. Tell the entire story, the fire, the evidence, everything. Make it impossible for Pemberton to silence me without proving his own guilt. That's suicide. He'll have you killed before you finish testifying. Not if I do it in front of Parliament, in front of the king himself. Make it so public, so witnessed, that murdering me would only confirm every word I'd said." Adrian stared at her. "You'd risk everything on the hope that public opinion would protect you?" "I've risked everything to end this, to give Thomas a future, to stop Pemberton from destroying more lives." She met his gaze steadily. "And yes, to fight for the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we could have something beyond survival." "Eleanor, I can't let you. It's not your choice. It never was. This is my fight, Adrian. My evidence, my testimony, my life to risk. I'm grateful for your protection, but I won't hide anymore. Then we do it together." "You testify, I present the documentation, we face Pemberton as a united front. You'd destroy your reputation for me? My reputation is built on things far more fragile than truth. Besides," he smiled, fierce and bright, "I'm the Iron Duke. Rumors of my ruthlessness are vastly exaggerated, but I've never discouraged them. Let's see if Pemberton's as brave when facing someone who actually fights back." Over the next 24 hours, Greystone Abbey transformed into a war room. Cross and Whitmore arrived with updated evidence. Adrian's solicitor, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Hale, who'd made her reputation defending the indefensible, assessed their case with brutal honesty. You have proof of conspiracy. You have documentation of illegal activity. What you don't have is a smoking gun connecting Pemberton directly to attempted murder. The fire could have been an accident. The evidence could have been your father's alone. A good barrister will create reasonable doubt. Then we need to remove that doubt, Adrian said. What would constitute definitive proof? A witness, someone who participated in the attack and is willing to testify against Pemberton. Where do we find such a person? Margaret smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. We create one. Her plan was elegant in its simplicity. Use the investigators to approach one of Devlin's thugs, the youngest, least experienced. Offer him immunity and protection in exchange for testimony. Most criminals would sell their own mother to avoid the noose, and the story they needed was simple. Pemberton ordered the attack on the Thornwood house to prevent Ilara from exposing his slave trade. It's risky, Cross warned. If the thug refuses or reports back to Devlin, then we're no worse off than we are now, Adrian said. Make the approach, today. While the investigators worked, Adrian's grandmother arrived. Dowager Duchess Catherine Blackwell was 73, sharp as Sheffield steel, and possessed of the kind of aristocratic authority that made kings nervous. She took one look at Ilara, declared, "You have spirit, girl, I like that," and immediately began mobilizing her vast social network. Pemberton thinks he has influence? I've been manipulating Parliament since before his father was born. Lady Morton owes me 3 favors. The Archbishop's wife is my goddaughter, and the King's mistress is particularly fond of the Blackwell Charitable Foundation. She smiled like a cat eyeing a mouse. By the time I'm done, Pemberton won't be able to buy a seat at a country assembly, much less orchestrate political protection. Your Grace, Ilara said carefully, I should explain. Your grandson and I, that is, You're in love with him. Yes, dear, I have eyes. And he looks at you like you hung the moon. It's disgustingly romantic. Catherine waved a dismissive hand. Marry him with my blessing. Better a scandalous marriage to a woman of actual substance than a respectable one to one of those insipid twits he's been avoiding for years. Adrian choked on his tea. Grandmother? Oh, hush, I'm old. I can say what I like. She turned back to Ilara. Now, tell me everything about this Pemberton creature, so I know precisely how to destroy him. The breakthrough came on the 3rd day. The young thug, a boy really, barely 20, named Michael Shaw, had been easier to turn than anticipated. Faced with evidence of his participation in an arson that killed 3 people, offered immunity in exchange for testimony, he broke. His statement was damning. Pemberton had personally ordered the attack, had paid Shaw and 5 others to set the fire during the ball, making it look like an accident, had specifically instructed them to ensure no one survived. He said if we did it right, all the evidence would burn and the girl would be discredited if she somehow escaped, Shaw testified, voice shaking. He laughed about it, said it was cleaner than a proper execution. Margaret Hale had the testimony witnessed, notarized, and sealed in 3 separate locations within hours. Then she sent formal notice to the Crown Prosecution Service, to Parliament, and to Pemberton himself. The message was clear: surrender or face trial. Pemberton's response came via a challenge to a duel. The note was delivered to Greystone by a stone-faced second, addressed to Adrian personally. His Grace has impugned my honor through spreading malicious lies and harboring a known criminal. I demand satisfaction. Pistols at dawn, 3 days hence, at the field behind St. James Cathedral. Bring your second and your courage if you possess either." Adrian read it twice, then calmly set it on fire. "You're refusing?" Ilara asked, torn between relief and confusion. "I'm ignoring it. Dueling is illegal, and I'm not giving Pemberton the satisfaction of killing me legally." "He's trying to provoke you." "I know. It won't work." But Adrian's jaw was tight. A duel would remove the case from legal proceedings. If he kills me, he claims it was a matter of honor, not murder. If I kill him, I face charges, and the evidence becomes tainted. Either way, he wins. So we proceed with the trial? We proceed with destroying him so completely that history forgets he ever existed. The formal charges were filed on a Monday. By Tuesday, half of London was gossiping about the scandal. By Wednesday, 3 other victims of Pemberton's schemes had come forward with additional evidence. By Thursday, the king himself had demanded a full investigation. Pemberton tried to flee. He made it as far as Dover before Adrian's agents intercepted him. The arrest was remarkably public, conducted in broad daylight with witnesses, ensuring there could be no claims of false imprisonment or conspiracy. The trial began 2 weeks later. Ilara testified first, her voice steady as she recounted everything: the discovery of the evidence, her father's threats, the night of the fire, the desperate escape. She wore mourning gray, her bearing dignified, her words precise. The prosecution presented the documentation: ledgers, letters, ship manifests. They called Shaw, who repeated his testimony with obvious terror but undeniable sincerity. They called sailors who'd been forced to participate in the trade. They called clerks who'd falsified records. The defense tried to discredit Ilara, suggesting she was unstable, vindictive, lying. Adrian's solicitor demolished every argument with cold precision. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all charges. Pemberton's sentence was death by hanging. His associates received various punishments, ranging from life imprisonment to financial ruin. The shipping company was dissolved, its assets seized to compensate victims. It should have felt like victory. Instead, Ilara felt hollow. Justice achieved, but at what cost? Thomas was safe, but orphaned. Pemberton would die, but so had her parents, corrupted by greed she'd never suspected. The evidence had brought down a criminal empire, but it had also exposed her to scrutiny she'd never escape. She stood in Greystone's garden, watching the sea when Adrian found her. "It's done," he said simply. "I know. You saved lives today. Dozens of people who would have suffered under Pemberton's trade are free because of your courage. I exposed my own family's shame. You chose truth over comfort. There's no shame in that." Ilara turned to face him. "What happens now? The trial is over. I'm no longer in danger. You've fulfilled your obligation to protect me." Adrian's eyes widened. "Is that what you think this was? Obligation? I don't know what to think anymore. We were thrown together by crisis. Now the crisis is over, and I'm just the woman who destroyed her own family and needs to rebuild a life from nothing. You're the woman I love. That hasn't changed. Love, born from proximity and danger. How do we know it's real?" Adrian closed the distance between them, taking her hands. "I've known real from false since I was old enough to hold a sword. This," he pressed her palm to his chest, where his heart beat strong and steady, "this is real. You're real. And if you need time to be sure of your own feelings, I'll wait. I'll wait years if necessary. But don't mistake my patience for indifference." "I'm terrified," Ilara whispered. "What if I'm not who you think I am? What if, without the danger, without the urgency, we discover we're not compatible?" Then we'll discover it together. Eleanor, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be honest, to try, to give us the chance we never had. Your grandmother was right. This is disgustingly romantic. Is that a yes? It's, possibly. Pending further investigation. Adrian laughed, a real laugh, unguarded and joyful. I'll take possibly. He kissed her then, soft and sure, a promise rather than a demand. And Alara let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe survival could lead to something more. Maybe even to happiness. Part 5. The wedding took place 6 months later, in Greystone's small chapel, with only a handful of guests. Thomas served as ring-bearer, taking his duties with endearing seriousness. The Dowager Duchess wept elegant tears. Margaret Hale attended with her wife, both looking pleased with themselves for reasons they refused to explain. Alara wore cream silk, not white, because second chances didn't pretend to be firsts, with lace that had belonged to Adrian's mother. She carried wildflowers from the cliffs where Adrian had first found her, a reminder that beauty could grow from desperate places. Adrian wore his military dress uniform, medals gleaming. But when he saw her walking down the aisle, his careful control shattered into something vulnerable and odd. "You're sure?" he whispered when she reached him. Terrified, but sure. The vicar kept the ceremony mercifully brief. They spoke vows that promised partnership rather than obedience, honesty rather than perfection. When Adrian slipped the ring onto Ilara's finger, his hand trembled. "I never thought," he began, then stopped, overcome. "Neither did I," Ilara finished. "But here we are. Here we are." The kiss that sealed their marriage was witnessed by people who'd fought beside them, protected them, believed in them. It tasted like salt air and second chances, like battles won and futures earned. At the reception, a modest affair in Greystone's dining room, the Dowager Duchess raised her glass. "To my stubborn grandson, who finally learned that walls keep out joy as effectively as pain. And to his remarkable bride, who survived the unsurvivable and chose love over safety. May your marriage be long, happy, and significantly less dramatic than your courtship." "Hear, hear," the guests chorused. Later, as the sun set over the cliffs, Ilara and Adrian stood in the same spot where she'd once carved a desperate message. Someone had commissioned a stone marker there, inscribed with 2 words. "They came." "Who authorized that?" Ilara asked, though she suspected she knew. "Grandmother. She said it was important to remember that rescue isn't just hoping, it's asking, and that sometimes, miraculously, someone answers." Did we rescue each other, do you think? Or were we just 2 drowning people who happened to grab the same piece of driftwood? Does it matter? I suppose not. Thomas ran past them, chasing Dante along the cliff's edge, his laughter carrying on the wind. The boy who'd been sick and silent in a cave was now healthy, happy, and showing signs of the mischief all children needed to thrive. "He'll need a proper education," Ilara mused. "Tutors, perhaps eventually university. He'll have everything he needs." "Including siblings?" Adrian's head wicked around. "Eleanor." "Not immediately, but someday. Children who grow up knowing love instead of schemes, who learn that honor matters more than appearance, who understand that strength includes vulnerability." You've given this considerable thought. I've had time. 6 months of watching you with Thomas, seeing how gentle you are despite your reputation. 6 months of falling more in love with you every day. I thought you were still investigating. I am. I expect to continue investigating for the next 50 years at least. Adrian pulls her close, his arms a shelter and a home. 50 years isn't nearly enough. Then we'd better make them count. They stood like that as the sun bled gold and crimson across the water, as the sea that had nearly killed Alara sang its endless song against the rocks. Somewhere in London, justice continued to unfold. Somewhere in England, lives they'd saved were beginning anew. But here, on this cliff, two people who'd learned to survive alone were learning something infinitely harder and infinitely better: how to live together. How to trust that tomorrow would come and bring joy rather than catastrophe. How to believe that the words carved into stone, "Save us," had been answered not just with rescue, but with redemption. "What are you thinking?" Adrian asked. "That I used to believe stories like ours didn't exist, that happy endings were for people who'd never truly suffered. And now? Now, I think happy endings aren't about erasing pain. They're about choosing to build something beautiful in spite of it." Very philosophical for a woman who survived on raw fish and rainwater for 15 months. The fish gave me perspective. Adrian laughed, and the sound was everything Alara had dreamed of during those dark cave nights: warmth and safety and the promise of uncounted tomorrows. Thomas called to them from the gardens, demanding they come see something Dante had found. They went, hand in hand, leaving the marker and the message behind. But the words remained, weathering wind and salt and time. "Save us." And carved beneath, in fresher stone, an answer: "We did."